I'm Rachel, 32, the youngest daughter, always the afterthought. This trip, I hoped things might feel different, but once again I wasn't even asked where I wanted to stay. They booked rooms for everyone except me. I didn't argue, but the room I picked told them everything. They had already started dinner by the time I arrived. No one looked up when I pulled the chair out at the far end of the table. The laughter at the other end, near the head of the table where Mom, my sister, and her husband sat, kept going seamless, unbroken. A fork scraped lightly against porcelain, a bottle uncorked with a soft pop. I smoothed my skirt and tried to catch my sister's eye. She didn't see me. Mom did, though. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to her wine glass. There was a place setting missing. I didn't say anything. Instead, I folded the cloth napkin they hadn't put out for me slowly, like I was supposed to be doing something. I reached for a water glass, someone else's, and poured a small amount from the bottle at the center. The ice had mostly melted. Across the table, my brother-in-law whispered something into my sister's ear, and they both laughed. This was supposed to be a family vacation. One of those rare times we're all together that Mom always used to say she longed for. But when I got to the Airbnb booked by Mom and apparently paid for by my sister, I was told there were only 3 bedrooms. One for Mom, one for my sister and her husband, one for the kids. I was welcome to use the couch, they said, in that tone people use when they're pretending not to insult you. I had stood at the doorway for a moment, suitcase in hand, while my sister went back to unpacking. She didn't look up. "It's a comfy couch," my brother-in-law added without turning around. That was this morning. Now we were having dinner at a local restaurant. Fancy, a little too formal for a vacation. Mom liked that kind of thing. When the waiter came around, he skipped me. I had to clear my throat gently and ask for a menu. "Oh," he said. "Sorry, I was told this was the full party." My mom didn't correct him. She just sipped her wine. I ordered a small pasta, something I could finish quickly. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Wedding plans for a cousin I hadn't even known got engaged. Updates about my sister's new house, how the kids were doing in school. Every time I opened my mouth to add something, someone would pick that exact moment to talk louder, change the subject, or lean forward and block the line of sight. I wasn't even sure if it was deliberate anymore, but then my sister said it, like she'd been waiting for the perfect moment. "Emily's always just tagged along, hasn't she?" she said to Mom, laughing. "Remember how she used to follow us everywhere when we were kids?" I looked up. My hand tightened around the stem of the glass, but I didn't speak. "She still does," my brother-in-law added, eyes on his plate. "Tagalong M." The table laughed. The kids didn't understand the joke, but they laughed too because everyone else did. I took a sip of water and glanced toward the window beside me. Outside the resort, lights shimmered against the lake. Just past the trees, I could see the glow of the second villa, the one I had booked this morning when they told me about the couch. I hadn't told them. They didn't know. When dinner ended, I stood up quietly before anyone noticed. No one said goodnight. No one asked where I was going. As I left the restaurant, I could still hear them talking, laughing like I had never been there. My phone buzzed. A confirmation email. The suite key had been activated remotely. Room temperature set. Fridge stocked. Lake view. King bed. I looked up at the other villa, their villa, then down at my phone again. I didn't smile, but I didn't frown either. I walked away, heels silent on the stone path, hands relaxed by my side. Behind me, the laughter faded, and I didn't look back. I didn't go back to their villa that night. Instead, I walked the winding path past rows of cottages, the lake to my right, reflecting the warm, amber lights strung across the trees. My new room was quiet, almost too quiet, but it was mine. No one had picked the linens before I arrived. No one had tossed their luggage on the bed like it belonged to them. No one had left a used towel in the bathroom. It smelled clean, untouched. I ran my hand across the smooth edge of the dresser, then let my suitcase drop gently onto the stand. I stood for a moment at the balcony door, watching the flicker of movement at the villa across the way, my family's. Their silhouettes were backlit in the dining area. Someone refilled a glass. Someone else stood and gestured, laughing. I could tell it was my sister. She had that same animated way of talking she'd had since high school, like every word needed its own stage. I didn't envy her. Not anymore. I drew the curtain. In the morning, I walked past the villa on my way to the lake. I didn't plan to. It was just the shortest path. I had sunglasses on, coffee in hand, and my own keycard tucked in the side pocket of my light jacket. As I passed, the door opened. It was Mom. She looked surprised for a second, then confused. "Where did you sleep?" she asked, not in a worried tone, more like I had misplaced a belonging of hers. "In my room," I said simply. She blinked. "You didn't stay at the villa." I looked at her calm. "No." Before she could say anything else, I raised my cup slightly. "I'm heading to the lake. It's beautiful this morning." And I walked. The path curved toward the water, and I didn't hear the door close behind me. Later that day, I joined them for a group hike. The family had decided to go to one of the scenic overlooks for pictures. I arrived 5 minutes before the shuttle left. My sister did a quick head count, then frowned. "Wait. Did you stay somewhere else last night?" I didn't answer her directly, just smiled faintly and looked out the window. When we got to the overlook, everyone poured out ready with phones and jackets flapping in the mountain wind. Mom turned to me. "Can you take the group photo?" I paused. "Sure," I said, taking the phone. I stepped back, framing the shot. My sister posed in the center, arms wrapped around her kids. My brother-in-law stood beside her. Mom angled her face toward the sun. I clicked, then handed the phone back without a word. They turned to each other to check the photo. No one said thank you. I moved a few steps to the side away from them. The wind was stronger up here. I closed my jacket halfway and turned to the opposite direction where the horizon stretched past the lake, quiet and endless. My sister called out from behind me, "Hey, Em, don't wander off." I didn't respond, didn't turn, just stood there. The next few days were a loop of the same thing. I'd show up, they'd forget I was coming. I'd speak and the conversation would swerve. I'd walk into a room and no one would shift to include me, like I was a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. But I stopped shrinking. At breakfast on the third morning, the waitress brought coffee to everyone but me. I waved gently. "One more cup, please." The waitress looked confused. "You're with the other villa?" I nodded. My sister's fork paused in midair. "You're staying somewhere else?" This time, I answered clearly. "Yes. Where next door?" She frowned. "You got your own room?" I did. Mom stiffened in her seat. "Why didn't you say anything?" I met her eyes. "I didn't think anyone would ask." There was a moment, just a moment, when the whole table went still. The kids were busy with pancakes. My brother-in-law looked down. My sister leaned back in her chair. "Well, that's a bit much, isn't it?" She said, the laugh in her voice slightly forced. "Getting your own place like some VIP." I took a sip of my coffee. "Not really," I said quietly. "Just seemed easier." She opened her mouth like she was going to say something else, but then she didn't. Instead, she turned to her son and wiped syrup from his chin. I excused myself a few minutes later, left a tip on the table, and walked out into the sun. My room key was still in my pocket. I ran my thumb over it as I walked. The rest of the day, no one messaged me. No check-in, no "where are you?" No dinner invite, and I didn't send one either. That night I sat on the small balcony outside my room. The air was cooler than I expected, carrying with it the faint hum of crickets and the occasional murmur of conversation drifting from the other villa. They were playing a board game. My sister's laughter cut through the silence like a familiar old jingle. I remembered how she used to insist on being the banker even when we were kids. She said she was just better at managing things. I never argued. I never wanted to be in charge. I just wanted to be seen. A light flicked off in the villa across the way. Someone closed a sliding door. I could hear it even from here, the soft thud, the click of glass against frame. Another voice called out something I couldn't catch. Then quiet again. I stayed outside a little longer. The next morning, I walked into the lobby to ask about extending my reservation. The woman behind the desk smiled. "You're Emily, right room 204. I nodded. "I just wanted to stay an extra 2 nights if that's possible." She typed for a few seconds. "You're good to go," she said. "Actually, someone called about your room this morning, said they wanted to switch to it, but it's marked under your name prepaid." I blinked. "Really?" She nodded. "Didn't give their name. But I told them it was yours until the end of the week. I didn't ask who it was. I already knew. Back at the villa, my sister was in the kitchen making coffee. I came by to pick up a sweater I'd accidentally left on the patio. She glanced at me. "You're really staying in that room by yourself, huh?" I smiled, gently. "Yeah, I like it." There was something in her eyes, something unsure, almost calculating. She took a sip from her mug, then said lightly, "You know, Mom thinks it's kind of dramatic." I didn't answer. She continued, "Like, you could have just stayed with us." I looked at her calmly. I wasn't really invited to. That landed, quietly. Not like a punch, more like a mirror. She didn't say anything else. That night I went down to the lake again. There was a bench near the water, old wood, worn smooth by years of vacationers. I sat there with a blanket over my shoulders and a thermos of tea. From across the lake, the lights of the main villa flickered like little stars. I thought about how many years I had waited for a room to feel like mine. I hadn't planned on making a point. I just needed space. But somehow the quietness of my choice made more noise than I expected. Behind me, a branch cracked gently under someone's foot. I didn't turn. Whoever it was, they didn't speak. Just stood for a moment. Then footsteps retreated. I didn't need to look. Let them wonder. Let them sit with it. I stayed on the bench until the moon rose high and the lake turned to silver. When I stood to leave, I didn't rush. I folded the blanket, tucked it under my arm, and walked the long way around the villa, not because I had to, but because I could. The next morning brought sun, the kind that made the lake glitter like it had secrets to tell. I sat at the cafe by the dock, nursing a small latte and watching paddle boats drift lazily. It should have felt like vacation. It didn't. My phone buzzed a group message from Mom. "Family dinner tonight, 6 p.m., at the villa." No greeting, no direct mention of me, no ask if I'd be coming, just a broadcast. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing a simple thumbs-up emoji. It felt juvenile, but I didn't have the energy to write more. At 6 sharp, I arrived. Not late, not early. Just on time, like always. The front door was already open, laughter spilling out like perfume. My sister Rachel was in the kitchen arranging a charcuterie board. Her husband David lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone, feet up on the coffee table like it was his house. My parents sat at the dining table sipping wine mid-story. No one looked up. I stepped inside, wiping my feet carefully. The room smelled like rosemary and roasted potatoes. "Oh, Emily, you made it," Mom said finally, as if I'd materialized out of nowhere. "We weren't sure you'd come." "I got your message." "Well, I didn't know if it'd go through," she said, as though I lived in a cave, not a villa 50 feet away. David gave a small chuckle. "Still at that place next door, huh? Must be lonely." Rachel added, "It's kinda weird, Em. Like staying in your own place when we're all together." "It's comfortable," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. Dad asked, "You didn't want to stay with us?" There was a couch open. A couch, not a bed, not a room. I shrugged lightly. I didn't want to intrude. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Your family. You can't intrude on your own family." I didn't say it, but the couch they offered wasn't really about inclusion. It was about optics, about letting me be present but not belonging. Dinner started. We sat around the long wood table. Candles flickered in the center, and the spread was impressive. Mom always went all out for these things. As plates were passed, the conversation turned to Rachel's upcoming promotion. Her manager says she's basically running the team, David bragged. She could be director by fall. "That's amazing," Mom said, glowing. "She's always had leadership in her." "She was organizing bake sales at 10, Dad added. Rachel smirked. "Well, I learned from the best." There was a silence, one that stretched. No one asked what I'd been working on, what projects I had, whether I was happy. I was used to it. But that didn't mean it didn't land. Later in the meal, as the dessert plates were cleared, Mom brought up something I'd been dreading. So she said, "Since Rachel and David are taking the upstairs suite, and your father and I are in the master, we were thinking you could take the small room in the back next time, the one off the laundry." I blinked. "That's the storage room." "It's been cleaned out," she said quickly. "And it's just a place to sleep, really." Rachel chimed in. "It's quieter back there anyway. No traffic from the kitchen. I set down my fork. David added, "Honestly, I think it suits you. You like being on your own." There it was, the script they always ran. That I preferred to be alone, that I was distant, that I didn't try hard enough. I wanted to say something, but instead I smiled faintly. "Sounds fine," I said. Then I excused myself to the bathroom. In the mirror, my reflection stared back at me, calm, practiced, unreadable. But my hands trembled as I reached for the hand towel. I had lived this role for years. The quiet one. The extra. The tag-along. But this time, something felt different. The night air was heavy when I stepped out. My footsteps on the stone pathway barely made a sound, but I felt each one echoing louder in my chest. The villa next door mine sat with all its lights off, calm, unbothered. I liked it that way. Back inside the family villa, I could still hear them laughing. Rachel's sharp giggle, Mom's amused hum, David's low banter. It wasn't cruel laughter, but it wasn't for me. I walked slowly, savoring the silence between us. The next day, brunch was planned at the Lakeside Bistro, a place Dad loved for its old-school charm. I arrived last, though only by a minute. My seat had already been taken. Rachel looked up. "Oh, did you want to sit here?" She didn't move. David scooted over a bit. "You can pull a chair from the table behind." So I did. No one offered. No one apologized. I sat half a beat behind them outside the semicircle they had unconsciously formed. I ordered coffee. They talked about Rachel's possible move to San Francisco, about the schools there, about the tech scene David might try to get into. Mom said maybe we'll all go visit. Wouldn't that be fun? Dad nodded. A California Christmas. Why not? Rachel smiled. Emily can watch the house here? They laughed, not meanly, just carelessly. I stirred my coffee and let the swirl settle. At one point, a waitress came over with the wrong order, a croissant and smoked salmon. She looked at me and said, "Room 302. Right," I blinked. "That's me." The table paused. "You're in the executive suite?" David asked, raising a brow. "Just one of the upper rooms." "It was quiet," I said, taking the plate. Rachel laughed. "That place must have cost a fortune." I didn't answer. Later that afternoon, while everyone was back at the villa preparing for the group photo, Mom insisted on taking every trip I walked the shoreline behind my villa. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, waved at me from her balcony above. I waved back. Her mother leaned out. "We saw you come and go yesterday, lovely dress." "Thanks," I said, startled. "You're the owner, right?" I blinked. "Oh no," I said. "I just booked the suite." The woman smiled. "Well, the way the staff greeted you." "We thought you ran the place." I gave a small laugh. "No, just treated myself this time." That evening, I returned to the villa for the photo. Everyone was already lined up. Rachel in the center, parents on either side, David slightly behind her, arms crossed. Mom waved at me. "Emily, come stand by the end." It wasn't even a real spot. Half off the porch steps, squinting into the sun. Dad called out to the photographer, "Just one quick one before the light's gone." I walked over, but instead of standing where they pointed, I stepped back. "I'll just take one of you all," I said, pulling my phone up. Rachel frowned. "Seriously, I'll send it after." I took the picture, captured them perfectly smiling, arranged, curated. Then I turned, phone still in hand, and began walking toward the villa next door. They didn't follow, but I could feel it, Rachel's gaze on my back. Something shifting. She had always positioned me as the observer, but now I had chosen to be one. Inside my villa, a tray of fresh fruit and chilled wine had been set up by the staff. A small card sat next to it. "Welcome back, Ms. Emily. Let us know if you need anything." It was handwritten. I touched the card's edge. They had no idea. And I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. The next morning, the itinerary said we'd hike to the cliff outlook. Rachel loved the photos she could take from there, the kind with her hair blown back, a sliver of the lake behind her, the light just right. I met them outside the villa, already dressed. Rachel took one glance at my sneakers and said, "Those are fine, I guess, but the trail's rocky." I smiled. "I'll manage." David offered to carry her water bottle. Mom had on her straw hat, the one she wore every vacation. Dad walked ahead with a map app open, pretending he didn't know the trail by heart. No one asked if I needed anything. Midway up the trail, Rachel stopped to adjust her shoe. David knelt to help. I stood slightly off to the side, watching the breeze rustle through the trees. That's when I heard it. She just tags along, Rachel murmured. Not even a whisper. Just soft enough to think it wouldn't carry. David chuckled. Like a ghost. A tag-along. Like I had no story of my own, only wandered the margins of theirs. I didn't speak. Instead, I turned and walked a few steps further, as if the view had caught my attention. At the top, when we reached the lookout, Rachel posed for pictures. Mom gave directions, turn more to the left, chin up a bit. I took some shots on her phone, steady and careful. When it came time for a group photo, Dad handed my phone to the same stranger couple we'd seen on the path. Here, get one of all of us, he said. The man took a few photos. Rachel asked to check them. This one's fine, she said. Emily, can you send it later? I nodded. On the walk down, they planned lunch. Let's try that Italian place by the water, David said. Reservations? Rachel replied. I'll ask the concierge. Mom turned to me. You're still at the what room was it again? 302? She paused. That's one of the nicer ones. I nodded again. That night, I dined alone at the chef's table inside my villa's private kitchen space. It wasn't lonely. It was intentional. The chef explained each dish locally sourced, prepared with care. I listened, engaged. I complimented the reduction on the duck, the balance in the dessert. He smiled. Not many notice. I notice a lot, I said. After dinner, I sat on the private patio with a book, the lake dark and calm below. A message pinged on my phone group chat. Rachel, tomorrow spa morning, 10 a.m., girls only. No hi, no hope you can make it. I replied with a thumbs up. They didn't need to know I'd already booked the suite next door, spa, steam, deep massage, my own time, my own rhythm. When I finally lay in bed that night, the sheets cool and crisp against my skin, I thought about that word again. Tag-along. I'd worn it like a quiet coat for years, light, forgettable, assumed. But not anymore. Not here. Not now. And certainly not when I had the keycard to the villa next door. The final morning came with overcast skies, soft light pouring through the gauzy curtains. I'd already packed. My villa was quiet except for the sound of water lapping the stones below. There was something about a slow morning in a place that wasn't supposed to be mine, but that I had chosen anyway, that made every breath feel deliberate. Checkout wasn't until noon. I still had time. At 9:15, I saw them. My family gathered in the main courtyard. Rachel was adjusting her sunglasses. David was checking the car service on his phone. Mom and Dad had their luggage out front. They were talking to the front desk staff, someone in a navy blazer. I walked by, coffee in hand, not stopping. Emily, Rachel called, surprised. You're up early. I had breakfast already, I replied, nodding toward the lake. Rachel tilted her head. You stayed at 302, right? No, I said, smiling slightly. I moved. Before she could ask where, the hotel manager stepped forward. Ms. Emily, he said warmly, the black car is ready for you outside, and the receipt is in your email as requested. We hope you enjoyed your stay in Villa 310. Rachel blinked. Villa 310, Mom repeated, confused. That's the one next to the bridal suite. The manager smiled. Yes, one of our premium standalone lakefront villas. Ms. Emily checked in the day after you arrived. Full private services. There was a brief silence. David lowered his phone. Rachel looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. I thought you were in the hotel? She said finally. The regular wing. I was, I replied, voice even. Then I wasn't. They didn't know what to say. The valet opened the car door for me. Ma'am, he said respectfully. As I stepped in, I turned to Rachel. Thanks for inviting me on the trip. Her mouth parted just slightly, no words came out. Before anyone could recover, the concierge approached from behind. Ms. Emily, he said, I almost forgot your spa package balance was covered by the points from your corporate card. Again, thank you for booking with us through executive services. I nodded, and with that I stepped into the car. From the rear window I saw them standing there, still in the courtyard. David holding his phone like it might explain what had just happened. Mom looking at Dad. Rachel frozen. They had made plans. They'd built this trip around a vision where I was an afterthought, but I'd simply rewritten it. Not loudly, not with confrontation, just with a keycard and a quiet decision. The car pulled out of the gravel driveway slowly, the sound of the tires crunching against the stones oddly satisfying. I didn't look back again, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to. Inside the vehicle, I sat quietly, hands folded on my lap. The driver asked if I wanted music. I shook my head. The silence was enough. As we reached the front gates, my phone buzzed. First Rachel, then David, then Mom. None of the texts were angry, just confused. Rachel Villa, 310 David. You were next to us the whole time, Mom. Why didn't you tell us? And then the one that made me pause. Rachel. Did you pay for that yourself? I stared at the screen. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. They wanted to understand, but not for the right reasons. It wasn't concern. It was disbelief. They hadn't imagined that I could have moved on without informing them, or worse, without needing them. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my photo gallery. One shot stood out: my room's view of the lake at sunrise, still, bright, uninterrupted. I set it as my lock screen. Halfway through the ride, the driver's radio crackled faintly, an interview segment about independence and self-worth. I listened not for the words, but for the quiet way the host let her guest speak without interruption. That kind of space was rare. It reminded me of everything this trip hadn't been. No chaos, no jabs masked as jokes, no constant undercurrent of being the extra. My luggage had been sent ahead, so I didn't need to stop by the front desk at the airport hotel. But when I entered the lounge, I caught my reflection in the glass, calm face, clean posture, nothing performative. And that's when it landed, the full weight of how much I had changed, not loudly, but intentionally. I had stopped asking for space and created my own. While waiting for my boarding call, a woman in her 60s sat beside me. She wore a deep green scarf and had a warm but quiet presence. After a few minutes of silence, she spoke. You seem peaceful. I looked over, surprised. Thank you. It took a while. She nodded like she knew what I meant. Hard-earned peace always shows. The loud kind fades fast. We didn't say much after that, but her words stayed with me. The final boarding call came. As I stood, my phone buzzed again. One last message from Rachel, just 3 words. Did we hurt you? I didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew somehow she was beginning to understand. The flight home was quiet, just the way I liked it. I didn't need to debrief with anyone. No retelling, no analyzing. I just let everything settle. As the plane lifted off, I watched the resort vanish into a patchwork of trees and rooftops. Somewhere down there they were probably still talking, still trying to piece things together. Who booked that villa? Why hadn't she told us? Was it really her? Let them wonder. The truth wasn't a declaration. It was a decision I had made a long time ago to stop auditioning for a role in a family script that was never written with me in mind. Back home, I unpacked slowly. Every item from the trip had a story, but I didn't dwell on any of them. I folded my clothes, stacked my books, and placed the small resort candle, a gift from the villa staff, on my nightstand. A few days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't a text or an email. It was handwritten. From Rachel. The envelope was thick. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Inside, her writing looped awkwardly, as if unsure of how to start. She didn't apologize. Not directly. Instead, she recounted a moment from when we were kids, a camping trip, where I had cried alone in my tent because she and the cousins had told me I wasn't cool enough to sit by the fire. I think we learned that kind of exclusion from somewhere, she wrote. And I think I kept it going because it made me feel closer to them, but it shouldn't have been at your expense. I sat down, letter in hand. Her words didn't heal everything, but they cracked something open, and sometimes that's where light starts to get in. Still, I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because the silence finally felt like mine. Weeks passed. I returned to work. I booked another solo trip, this time to a small cabin upstate with no cell signal and no shared itinerary. Before leaving, I stopped by a local print shop and had the photo of my villa view framed. I hung it in my hallway right by the door. It greeted me every time I left and welcomed me every time I came home. One evening, David called. I didn't pick up. Instead, I listened to the voicemail. "Emily," he said, his voice unusually soft. We didn't get it. "You were always just there. And maybe that's why we overlooked you. But we see you now." I deleted the message. Not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed it as proof. I already had my own. It was in the way I carried myself now, in the space I no longer asked for permission to occupy, in the villa I booked without a second thought, in the silence I held not as punishment, but as peace. One Sunday I visited the lake alone, the one that looked like the view from my room. The air was cool, the kind that made you breathe a little deeper. I sat on a bench. No phone, no distractions. Just stillness. 2 kids biked past laughing. A couple walked their dog. The world spun on, and I sat there unbothered, unseen by most, and yet more present than ever. When I finally stood to leave, I didn't look back at the bench. I didn't need to. I had taken my place in the story. Not the one they wrote, the one I had written for myself. Some people fight to be heard. Others wait to be asked. But every now and then someone chooses neither. They simply leave the door open and let the silence speak for them. Because being seen doesn't always start with being noticed. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop needing permission to exist. And that moment, it never needs an audience.